Cash is king and post offices are castles. And treacherous law threatens to jail 1.5 million Australians. Coming up on this week's episode of the Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 25th of July 2024. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by Citizens Party researcher and author Richard Bardon. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's show, we're going to talk about the CrowdStrike outage of half the world, the dumb half of the world. Unfortunately, the sensible ones protected themselves from it. But what it means, I mean, it's, brought the message home. Cash is king. We need manual redundancies. Never give it up. And there's lots to be said about that. And of course, how our postal bank will help to save it. So stay tuned for that. Plus, we're going to talk about something very disturbing, which is the case of an Australian jailed for foreign interference. And when you hear why, I think confidently you won't believe it. And it says a lot about how our country is run at the moment. So let's get right into it. But remember first, help us get this message around. We do the show not just because we're commentators, but we're trying to change these things that we're exposing. And you can help by helping to share this video that will give the details. So the way to do that is like it, share it on social media as widely as possible. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and remember to ring the bell icon. Comment below, which is actually good for feedback. I appreciate it. I try and engage as I can, and it's also good for the algorithm to get the show promoted even further. And of course, donate to what we're doing. And what we're doing is just full on. It doesn't stop. We're in the middle of all sorts of things at the moment. And of course, if you're regular viewers, you'll know what we're talking about. We keep you updated here. So if you can donate, you click on the donate button, that would be appreciated. Also, before we get into the show proper, I've got a couple of updates, and they're pretty serious. So the first one is a breaking news update on David McBride. So David McBride is the well-known Australian war crimes whistleblower who, because he blew the whistle, has exposed war crimes that Australians committed in Afghanistan. Those war crimes are being addressed. In fact, just last week, the families of the Afghan families of the people that Australian soldiers killed in those war crimes have been compensated by the Australian government. But bizarrely, no perpetrator of war crimes has gone to jail, and the only person who has gone to jail is the man who revealed them, David McBride. But he is having a very, very difficult time in jail. His legal team are about to launch their appeal for him, which is a really, really crucial step. But what I want to do is play you now a clip from David's lawyer, Eddie Lloyd, and she's speaking a couple of days ago on TNT Radio, but we've got a clip of it because they do videos of their shows on TNT Radio, with Mike Ryan on the Mike Ryan Show. And Eddie Lloyd is explaining what the conditions David McBride is being held in right now, and she describes it as hard time. Anyway, let's just play the clip, listen to yourself, because you'll see why he needs all the help he can get.
So the best thing that people can do, of course, is to donate to his fundraiser and to write to him in custody. In terms of visits and where he is at the moment, I mean, it's been nearly 69 days, okay? So they do this intake assessment at the beginning where they classify you as to what kind of prisoner you are, like which part of the facility is the most appropriate facility for you. So he was classified. He's obviously a minimum prisoner. He's not a violent prisoner. He was placed into a cottage. He didn't really want to go there, but he felt a bit of pressure to go there. So he went to the cottage, and very recently he was stood over in the middle of the night and issued a death threat. And so they had to pull him out of that cottage, and then they placed him in a maximum security cell block, and he received another death threat there. So they pulled him out of there, and he's done about seven or 8 days now in segregation, which is isolation, which is where you get 1 hour out of your cell a day. You have no privileges. His family, his former wife Sarah, was completely concerned because he wasn't responding to emails. He had a minimal email contact with his family where he was previously. They just cut that. He has his visits. Who knows? His visit days and dates are changing all the time. It was previously 1 hour on one Thursday, once per week, and that was it. And that's the only opportunity anyone could visit him. Now, we're not even sure what day or even if he can receive visits. I'm lucky I'm in that position as his lawyer to be able to have as many conferences as I can with him. His mental health is not good. He's getting no access to natural light at the moment. He's in a high security wing now. He's been moved out of isolation into a high security wing with a mix of prisoners, pedophiles, murderers, rapists, all of those kinds of people. Since he's been in there, I think it's 69 days now, Mike, he's always looking over his shoulder. He's never able to relax. He's someone who experiences PTSD. He's had major depressive disorder before. There's only so much medication can do in a situation like that, when you have to sleep with one eye open really every night, looking over your shoulder, making sure that someone's not going to attack you or harm you. So things are very, very grim at the moment. We're not even sure if all of the letters are getting through. I know some have, I know some haven't. But certainly what we're wanting to do, we really have hardly any money in the kitty. Myself and the two barristers have been working pro bono to date. And so we're asking people to just throw whatever they can into his fundraiser called David v. Goliath on the Chuffed fundraiser platform, so we can hopefully run a bail application in the near future and get this appeal on.
So that's pretty shocking, right? I mean, I was there, remember, Richard, the day that he was sentenced. You know, I knew it was a very, very challenging thing he did. He went into this knowing all along, you know, he said it when he sat there where you are now, and I interviewed him in 2022. He knew this, but if you remember the day he got sentenced, it was wall-to-wall coverage of the sentencing, and it was all universal condemnation of the government, right? But the government has clearly decided just to weather that, because he shouldn't be there at all. The Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, should have intervened before this case went to court and said, no, that was in the public interest, right? And he didn't. So now you've got that happening, and when there's death threats being made, you have to wonder where they're coming from.
Yeah, and how those people got into the maximum security something to get to be there and stand over him and make these death threats. How does that just happen?
Well, look, people may not appreciate this. There has always been an interface between organised crime and the intelligence agencies. And if there are people because, you know, David McBride's no threat to organised crime, the kind of people who control people in prisons, but if they're doing the bidding of intelligence agencies,
or just getting paid.
Or just getting paid, exactly. So
that's their whole thing.
This is really serious. So this appeal is obviously crucial. You know, get behind the family as much as you can. All right. On another matter, and we'll elaborate on this a bit more. Dan Duggan, an update from last week, is Dan Duggan, the Australian who's also in jail, because the Americans are trying to extradite him to America for supposedly training Chinese pilots in South Africa back in 2012. Last week we reported how this week was D-Day for him, because this is when they were going to put up their final submission to the Attorney General, because the Attorney General, the same Attorney General who betrayed David McBride, the same Attorney General will decide on Dan Duggan's case whether he gets extradited or not the courts anymore. The problem was the CrowdStrike outage, which we'll talk about as our main feature, the CrowdStrike outage stopped him being able to edit his final appeal. So it was delayed. So that's going to happen probably next week, the final submission. Now I've done a bunch of interviews. We put out a statement last week. I've done 2 interviews on this. that we can put the links below. You can see the elaboration on that actually. So I'll get the producer to put the links to those interviews below. But again, it's a similar thing. If you can help, please do, because in the case of both these guys, Dan Duggan and David McBride, they're taking on the system with no resources, right? And they shouldn't have to.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, David McBride, like you said, he went in eyes open. Notwithstanding that none of this should have ever happened to him. Dan Duggan's in jail literally for minding his own business.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
They just decided to make this an example of this guy.
The people who want to destroy relations with China so that we all accept a war is inevitable have to break apart the economic relationships, etc. And to do that, they've got to instill fear in people so they don't pursue those opportunities. And to do that, they've got to make an example of some people. And Dan Duggan is the guy they're making an example of. All right, so yeah, if you've got time, look at the links below, and you can see more on that. That's it for the updates. Let's get into the main program. Cash is king, and post offices are castles. I hope you like that title. Of course, we all know cash is king, but the second part is just as important because how are we going to save it, right? And we've got a plan to save it, but if you didn't know cash was king, then before last Friday, then you should now. So as you should know by now, there was they call it a global outage. It wasn't quite global. Countries that have a healthy skepticism of the American-centered internet technology.
Or countries, ironically, that were sanctioned and blocked out of the American system. Right. American run internet system.
Which is Russia.
Russia, Iran, North Korea, the usual guys.
So they've been sanctioned by the Americans, so they don't get to participate in this wonderful American-centric internet, and therefore they weren't affected. China had deliberately protected itself by by decentralising and not being exposed to that system. And
by legally enforcing the acceptance and use of cash.
That's right. People don't know that. They always carry on about social credit in China. No, businesses in China don't accept cash, they get fined. So they weren't affected, but a lot of the rest of the world was. And was it awesome in terms of the scale of this? This was unbelievable. International chaos from every country and every company that foolishly doesn't have manual redundancies for their processes. This is what got to me. I mean, I'm not even 50 yet, and neither are you. But I feel like an old fuddy-duddy. But I'm going to keep carrying on about it. Why? Embrace the new technology as much as you like, but why rip out the stuff, the old stuff that will always work, just so you can have the new stuff? You could have both.
Yeah.
But they determined to get rid of the old stuff and make us completely dependent on this new system. These new systems, and they're not reliable.
No, it's literally as dumb as banning pens and paper from schools because we have iPads now. It's that stupid.
It is that stupid. It is literally that stupid. And that's the right use of the word literally. And Richard's a stickler for that sort of thing. All right. So the only people for a while there, the only people who could transact, and all the big supermarkets, cash only, cash only, cash only. So people don't get rid of it. Now there's a bill that Bob Katter and Andrew G, the independents, or Andrew G introduced it, and Bob Katter seconded it, and Di Lee, the other independent, was a big supporter of it. A month or two ago, they introduced a bill to Parliament making it mandatory for businesses to accept cash. That should be the biggest no-brainer now. On the first day Parliament's back after the winter recess, they should all file in and pass that bill like that, right? You cannot let these banks get away with what they've done to force us into a digital economy and take away the most reliable alternative, the all-weather, ever-ready alternative, cash. Cash is king. Now, we've got more to say about it because we'll get on to post offices in a minute. But before we do, we have to make a political comment. This was caused by this company in a way that I think we should consider it almost self-inflicted. Because if you know about this company, CrowdStrike. So Richard, who's CrowdStrike?
Okay, so CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity company that rose to prominence. I don't remember offhand when it was founded.
It's about 2011, I think.
Yeah, thereabouts. But it rose to prominence in 2016 with the Russiagate scam. And it was a scam. For anyone who doubts that, I wrote articles about it, so did others around here and our friends around the world. They invented this nonsense of that ASIO and ASD are spruiking now about how advanced persistent threat groups are hacker collectives employed by foreign governments when they're actually just technical indicators that might indicate a common source. That's them. Their board is, the president of the company, funnily enough, is an Australian guy, but the board and the executive is populated by all of these former intelligence and FBI people, and so, but it is a commercial cybersecurity company. And so what happened with this outage, they updated, they're in the system, they're like the oil in the engine, right? As well as, think of it more as an immune system coupled with that, right? That's how cybersecurity works. They have to be everywhere. They have to be in the core of the operating system. And what happened? Somebody screwed up the code in an update to their premium subscription cybersecurity product, and it took down every computer that had that in there.
42 kilobytes, one line of code, stuffed up the world.
Yeah. And so every single computer that this happened to had to be manually rebooted in safe mode, delete that file, rewind it, reset it to the before that update, and then it was fine again.
Now the thing is though, so back to its origins, because I consider this to be almost hilarious in one way, because you've said it was the company that became famous for Russiagate, and specifically Russiagate was the Democratic National Committee's computers in 2016 were hacked, and Hillary Clinton's emails were leaked, and WikiLeaks published them.
Yeah.
Now those emails showed absolutely horrible stuff that America was doing on the world stage, including funding ISIS and all that kind of stuff. It's all in those emails.
Yep.
So how did they change the subject from the actual content of Hillary Clinton's emails? Oh, the Russians hacked it.
Yeah.
Right? And it was so. But how do you prove a hack? Like when it's the layman they're telling this to, we'll never know. We'll never know in a million years. So they bring in experts to add the veneer of credibility. Oh, these experts have said, but there was alternative experts who came in and said, well, hang on, the particular download of the file was too fast to have been a hack over the internet.
Over the internet. It had to be done on site.
It had to be done on site, so copying onto a USB. And then, of course, no one knows, because WikiLeaks is anonymous, Julian Assange can't say where it came from, but he did say, emphatically, it didn't come from Russia. Yeah. Right? He said it did not come from the Russian government. He said that emphatically because no one wanted to believe him. So actually, because of CrowdStrike, in a sense, Julian Assange spent 5 years in jail because the Democrats decided he was just a Russian agent. They hated him so much that...
Well, I mean, they knew he wasn't, but they decided to make...
Exactly.
To cook that up.
They used the propaganda. He's a Russian agent.
Themselves,
right? So let him rot and die in prison. You could also argue, Richard, I don't think it's a long bow to argue that it probably wouldn't be Ukraine war without this bullshit. Because, Russiagate claims meant that there was no opportunity for Putin and Trump to come to any arrangement in Trump's first 4 years. None at all. Like they just bombarded with this Russiagate stuff based on these lies, based on this company's claims. And so when I looked at this company, I thought, well, it looks like it's just a fake company that was set up for propaganda purposes, but somehow has been able to leverage its reputation into a real commercial role. But what we saw on Friday was the bottom line, it's an incompetent company.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Brought down the system through its sheer incompetence. And by the way, before we move on, if it wasn't the Russians hacking and it was an inside job in the DNC, there was a random murder on the streets of Washington at the time that the police just wanted to pass away as a random mugging. But it was a young man named
Seth Rich.
Who was Seth Rich? He worked in the DNC offices, right?
A random mugging where nothing was stolen.
A random mugging where nothing was stolen, but he worked in the DNC. If someone could, here's someone who could have done this if it was an inside job and pass the information on to Julian Assange. Anyway, so this company has a dirty, dirty propaganda history, and if you were disrupted last Friday and Saturday because of it, if you were stuck at an airport, right, you should be really, really mad at this propaganda machine that helped set the whole thing up. Anyway, all right, so that's CrowdStrike. Let's get back onto the topic at hand. So we know cash is king, and we know being 100% digital is a total vulnerability. There's another vulnerability with digital though, and we've got to bring this home. So what I want to play now, Richard, is a clip from The Project just 2 nights ago here in Australia on Channel 10, because The Project felt that they'll explain it themselves, but basically they did an episode on this subject of digital online scams, because they did one story where they interviewed Rod Quantock, who people old enough, especially in Victoria, will remember as Captain Snooze, who used to, the comedian used to advertise the mattress factory, Captain Snooze. He got scammed, and when they did a show with him, they got flooded with other people reporting the same thing to them. So they did another episode, and that's what I wanted to play, but I'm going to play it's too long to play the whole thing. We'll play the opening. We're not going to have, you'll see the couple that they interview, but we're not going to play that interview. But then I want to play what comes afterwards at the very end, where you'll see the discussion of just how widespread this scamming is. Have a look.
You might remember last night we spoke to comedian Rod Quantock, who lost thousands when he fell victim to an elaborate banking scam. Rod wanted to share his story to raise awareness. Today, we have been flooded with messages from other victims because it turns out it's happened to a lot of you. Here are some of your stories.
And I thought, I'm going to tell the world about this because I'm a tiny fraction of a national disaster.
Losing that amount of money, yeah, it changes your life. We're not rich people by any means. Actually, I'm getting a little bit emotional talking about it now, sorry.
This is Andrew. In September last year, he got a call from the HSBC fraud department who told him his account had been compromised.
He had our names, our location, address, money in the bank accounts. He knew everything. He had answers to everything.
But the call was fake. For more than an hour, Andrew was on the phone to a scammer. In that time, he handed over a one-time security code, giving the scammer access to his account. They stole $50,000.
I would have thought if the bank was onto it, that would have been stopped. But unfortunately, it took months and they've come back and said, no, we can't do anything about it. It's your fault.
Last year, Aussies lost $2.74 billion to scammers, but in the year to June 2022, only 2 to 5% of losses were reimbursed across the 4 big banks.
Banks are blaming the victim because they don't want to pay the money. It costs a lot of money to invest in the technologies that will keep their customers safe online.
In the UK, banks will be forced to compensate scam victims. The idea, to incentivise banks to invest in fraud detection and prevention. But the Australian Banking Association is resisting, claiming it would create a honeypot effect, encouraging scammers to target Aussies more often.
It's a bizarre argument because we're a honeypot now, and the scammers know that.
81% of victims say their bank failed to flag a scam before the transfer was made. Victims left to carry the burden of the loss, like Scott and Danielle, who yesterday lost $98,000, their entire life savings.
It's almost immoral for banks to continue down this path. There's billions of dollars been lost by so many people, and to sort of continue the dragging of the feed, it's just wrong.
It's off the chain. So they've been scammed, their neighbour's been scammed, you've been scammed.
Yeah.
Have you been scammed?
I've been scammed, but I've been skimmed.
Yeah,
so obviously there's been
right.
a security breach where they've taken just all the money in the bank.
My husband's been scammed. Like, what is going on?
Gee, that means I'm next. It's that common, right?
Surprise, it is.
And
It's
when
inevitable.
the bank says, oh, look, you know, it's not our fault, well, aren't they supposed to be protecting our information so this doesn't happen? I mean, that's what makes it so believable when these people call, that they know so much about you and your personal situation.
Well, you've got to think, when it starts hurting the bank financially, you've got to think that's when they'll kind of really put an end to it and try to stop it. Obviously, it's not, because they're not doing anything about it.
At the point where Australians decide that it's safer for them not to have a bank account.
We pull it all out.
That's probably
exactly.
But it's not an option now.
It's not for well, your cash revolution.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now that is I regard that clip, frankly, as a sign of the times. That's the times we're in. Everybody is being caught out by this stuff. And I was having a discussion with someone yesterday about this. Elderly people live in terror of this, right? This is a reign of terror now, and elderly people have been forced into online banking. But young people, the thing with them, they're also vulnerable, partly because they think they're sophisticated
they think
online.
they're bulletproof.
That's right. But as sophisticated as you might be, there are very clever people with criminal minds around the world, and there's whole warehouses full of them.
Yeah, actual hackers, not
Actual
imaginary
hackers.
Russian ones.
That's right, the real deal. A lot of them in India, where, by the way, our banks have decided it's fit to outsource all our data to India.
India and Eastern Europe.
If I was a poorly paid Indian, and this is not to single them out, but that's where the outsourcing is, and that's where a lot of these hacker factories are. If I was a poorly paid Indian, I might want 2 jobs. Work in a low paid NAB facility, getting access to people's bank account data, and then walking over the road to the hacker factory and hacking those people based on that data, right?
Well, you don't even have to hack them. Just pretend to be the bank
Pretend
that
to
you
be the
work
bank.
for, and you've got their information that you need to verify who you supposedly are, and that's all it takes.
Exactly. So here's the deal. The more banks, one of the themes of that show was they compared it, as you heard, to the UK, where in the UK the banks are now required to pay what people have lost from these online scams. And our banks, of course, which are the gods of Olympus in this country, and they rule the roost, our banks are resisting that and say no, 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 and they've come up with this caveat emptor thing. Oh, if people got redress for falling for online scams, then it'll make the problem actually worse. That's a caveat emptor, buyer beware argument.
They're trying to turn it into a behavioural economics issue
Exactly.
instead of one about complying with data security laws that they're somehow de facto exempt from in the first place.
But even if the banks were on top of their game and were really aggressive on this, even if that's the case, every improvement they make in the system, these armies of criminals around the world will be doing night and day working out how to break that.
Yeah.
Right? This is a permanent war. The only safe haven from this stuff is the bank branch. So it's not that the bank shouldn't ever call you up and say there's a problem, but the call should only ever be like this. Hello, Joe Boggs. Hello, Richard Bardon. We think there's something wrong with your account. Come down to the branch so we can fix it. And then you hang up. Nothing ever done over the phone. You go to the branch. But hello, there's a problem with that scenario. Where are the branches? They've taken away the branches and they don't want to put them back. So the banks have gone way out on a limb here for this maximum profit approach of totally digital technology, where they can have all the profits without paying anything for the service. And they have exposed us to this threat. And the only real solution is to bring back branches. And of course, they don't want to. And because they're such bastards, they also don't want to be liable for compensating us if something goes wrong. That's why we need a public post office bank. That's why cash is king and the post office is his castle. That's how you should think about it. Bring back a public post office bank. Because a couple of things will happen if you bring back a public post office bank. First of all, there's 4,271 post offices in Australia still, and every single one of them will be a place where you can go and get face-to-face safe banking services, including advice on these kinds of problems. That's first of all. You'll also have guaranteed deposits. You'll also have lending to small businesses and local communities. And you'll have a big one, competition for the private banks. And what will happen if you have a public post office bank, the private banks will start seeing how many people are leaving them to join the public post office bank, and they will realise, well, we better actually open up more branches. And so you will be able to keep banking with your bank in branches only because a public post office bank has actually forced them to compete. That is the benefit of this system. But then we have another problem. We keep running into problems. We've got all these solutions, but we always keep running into problems. So the problem of safe havens for banking is there's no bank branches. The problem of having a public post office bank is Paul Graham and the current management of Australia Post is hell-bent on closing them all. And therefore, you're not going to have that security of the post office, and we've been on this theme for a while. We cannot let that happen. We have to stop this from happening. And if you've taken this for granted up until now, just imagine it's you and your local post office that it happens to. And to see how serious it is, we want to play now a current affair story from a week or so ago about two post offices in Melbourne, the St Kilda Post Office and the Frankston Post Office. So we'll play the whole thing, and Dave Hughes makes an appearance, etc. But play the whole thing, and you'll see just how much meaning there is for these local communities when they lose their post offices.
Well, for many, their last trip to the local post office is a distant memory. For others, it's a vital community hub. So when Australia Post announced closures are looming, residents quickly registered their stamp of disapproval.
In Melbourne, St Kilda, locals plan a special delivery for the Australia Post CEO. The signatures collected a show of people power by a community keen to save their post office.
Angel, the signatures are piling up.
Yep, they're fantastic, aren't they?
What do you think this shows us?
It shows us that we want the post office to stay.
Have you been in St Kilda a while, Angel?
I've lived here for 35 years.
Terrific.
Yep.
Australia Post wants this site shut tomorrow. But if you need proof that St Kilda wants its mail service, look at the love for this passing postie. The post office is about more than mail for former policeman Michael, who left the force after a squad car crash almost crippled him.
I had boxes of medical equipment that I would actually pick up weekly, like catheters, if I be more specific, stuff like that, that I could not get it normally on my home deliveries.
The campaign has the stamp of approval from Mayor Heather Consulo.
If people want a passport or all the other government documents that the post office offers, this is the place. St Kilda needs it.
Federal MP Josh Burns agrees.
You are a member of Mr Albanese's government. Will you raise this with the Prime Minister?
Well, I've already raised it directly with the Minister for Communications, Michelle Rowland. We had a meeting about this, and she understood how important this post office is for our community.
PO box users at the site to be left without a mailing address.
Australia Post has, by law, can make their own decisions about these sorts of things. So it's really a question of, are they willing to listen to the community?
Save the Frankston Post Office too.
In Frankston, southeast of Melbourne, business leader Joy E. Wood hits the streets over Australia Post plans to shut her local office next month.
I think it's important to have the human factor where we can actually, get our things organised, whether it's for business or personal use. Yeah.
Frankston favourite Pauline refuses to let go of a post office that's always been there for her.
Please keep our post office open. I beg of you, please keep our post office open for me and everybody else in Frankston. We need it for the disabled and the elderly and everybody else that relies on it.
Pauline's been posting letters here for 60 years.
How would you feel if it were to shut?
I'll be devastated. And so will a lot of people, other people. Some people have been away and they didn't know this. Oh my God, don't say the post office is shutting down.
Nathan Conroy's Mayor of Frankston.
Nobody actually knew anything. It was just a sign on the window of the post office. So we're all in shock.
Nathan recently meeting with the Australia Post boss.
He's not convinced about keeping it open, but what we are pushing for, and we'll continue to push for, is come work with us, finding a solution.
The Australia Post CEO is Paul Graham, who was appointed in 2021 and took home a salary of $2.39 million last year. Back in St Kilda, a local scallywag has joined the protest.
Mr Hughes, Seb Costello, Current Affairs.
Yeah, I know who you are.
Yeah, the post office, what do you think?
There's some bargains to be had there right now, but I'm absolutely devastated. This is my local. They cannot close this post office.
Proud St Kilda resident, comedian Dave Hughes.
This is not right. It's not right, Seb, and I don't know who to... what are we going to do? This is crazy. This is a local institution and it should not close down.
Mr Hughes, before you go, a plumber has contacted us about some work at your property where the invoice wasn't paid. Have you got anything to say about that?
It was lost in the mail. You'll get your money, all right? You'll get your money.
And with that, it's finally time to sign, seal and deliver the petition to Mr Graham, with a line of protest, starting in the next postcode, that goes on and on and on.
Save our post office!
Well, Australia Post says it's not financially sustainable to keep all its post offices around the country open. We say don't underestimate the power of a determined community.
I mean, if you were taking it for granted before, Richard, I think don't take it for granted anymore.
Yeah.
So, and here's the rub. There's 90 of those closing this year. 90. And then Paul Graham, that's as a subset of the 270 one that he has said outright he's going to close. 271. Yeah. They're just going to go.
Yeah, because the legal minimum under their service obligation is 4,000. So he's just going to bring it down to that by hook or by crook.
Yep. Bring it down. When there's a solution on the table, that will save the whole system, which is combine post offices with banking. You have a public post office bank and the revenue from banking will keep the network in place. Win-win. It's the definition of win-win. There's no better plan on the books in Australia today. This is the best one. Now, because we're so convinced on this, I went down and met with the leaders of the St Kilda Post Office protest this week. They loved the Post Office Bank proposal. They were completely fired up. Their post that was the day that was on the 18th. That story, right? So that post office went ahead and closed on the 19th. One of the leaders was a businessman who explained to me what it means for him. So as a businessman, he used to be 200 metres from the post office where he had a post office box that he uses for his business. So they closed the post office and then you look at where the closest ones are. So there's one 1.2 kilometres away and one a bit further. Anyway, but he needed a post office box and the two closest ones, all their post office boxes were already filled. So the only place he could get a post office box was 5 kilometres away. So he's gone from walking 200 metres to check his mail to now 5 kilometres to check his mail. And that's one man of all those people associated with that post office. And then imagine if you're the elderly, rely on the post office, on a gopher or whatever. We saw these kind of stories with the local Glenroy post office that closed. And there's no need for it. Zero need for any of this if we had a public post office bank. We have to get every single one of these local post offices, and that's one of the reasons this is where you, the viewer, come in. Keep an eye open for this. If you find out in your area, wherever you are in Australia, that there is a post office closing and there are locals protesting, get involved, make contact, introduce them to, make sure they understand there's a national campaign for a post office bank that will stop all this, right? So that they get involved in that. And we can plug all these different local protests into the one national campaign and then feed that up into Parliament, because you might have noticed in the middle of that clip, the local federal member of Parliament was there, Josh Burns, who's a Labor guy. Now, he was pretty mealy-mouthed, as you saw, because he was saying, oh, there's nothing we can do. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish, that part. But the flip side of that is he had to be there. I don't care what party you're in, you will not be absent if your local community is protesting the closure of the post office. You have to be. And if we can get 90 different protests this year feeding up into the government, and then as these other post offices are closing, all those protests feeding up into the government, that's the sort of thing that will force the government to actually take the proposal for a post office bank and put it on the agenda, right? So spread the word, get that far and wide, and we've got a flyer for a post office bank, and we've also got our flyer that says no post office People's Bank without post offices, and you can share that as well. All right, we'll leave that there. Richard, let's move on, because this is, in the time I've got left, this is really serious what we're about to go through now. Treacherous law threatens to jail 1.5 million Australians. Now, I got a rhetorical question here, because, and then you can take it from here. I want people to listen very carefully. I'm going to pose a rhetorical question. If I said there's an Australian in jail for foreign interference because he aggressively lobbied politicians on behalf of a foreign country, donated big money to those politicians on the condition they always voted in favour of that foreign country, and organised free trips for those politicians to that foreign country so that they could be influenced to use their positions in government to ensure Australia always sides with that foreign country on the international stage, would you agree that that constitutes foreign interference? And the reason I pose that is because I agree that would constitute foreign interference. That is foreign interference. Doesn't mean that person should necessarily be in jail, but now it's an illegal thing to do. That should be foreign interference. What I have described there does happen in Australia every day. Literally every day what I've just described happens. It is rampant in this country, but nobody's in jail for it, and it's not called foreign interference. However, we'll come back to it, we'll reveal that. If people haven't figured out who that is, we'll reveal it at the end. However, Richard, there is a man in jail in Australia for foreign interference. Who is he, and what has he done?
Well, he's a now 68-year-old, ethnic Chinese, Australian, born in Vietnam, named Sonny Duong, Disan Duong, known as Sonny.
Born in Vietnam to a three-generation Chinese family.
Yeah, third generation in Vietnam. So it'd be like saying I were Irish or German, because that's where my ancestors came from 3 generations ago, right?
Yeah. So he's much more. I mean, he's ethnic Chinese, but he's much more Vietnamese, really.
Yeah, I mean, even his name is Vietnamese.
Exactly.
So, as for what he did, well, his crime, if you boil it down, is to have been in possession of political connections and a sum of money. It wasn't his.
Yeah.
While being Chinese and describing himself as Chinese because he is.
Yes.
Ethnically Chinese.
So just like in America, they have this thing that the African Americans have this expression, they get pulled over for driving while black.
Yeah.
He got arrested for having political connections while Chinese.
Yep.
That's it. That's the essence of it.
That's all it is.
But what did he actually do? Because some people would already know, but he only actually did one thing concretely. What did he actually do?
He invited his Member of Parliament and a guy he'd known for a while, about at least a couple of years, a bloke called Alan Tudge, people might remember, then the acting immigration minister and held various other cabinet positions in the previous government. Invited him to an event to hand over a cheque for $43,500 as a donation to a children's hospital, raised by the Chinese Diaspora Association, the Oceania Federation, so an international group.
That's what
he was the president of. That's what he did.
That's what he actually did. He donated a biggish check to a children's hospital. I think it was the Royal Children's Hospital. Yeah. And he asked this leading Liberal to be there. He himself, Sonny Duong, being a former Liberal candidate, and a long-standing Liberal Party member,
and he was a branch president for many years. He'd been a member for almost 30 years.
And this was in 2020, just as COVID was starting to get tense between us and China.
Yeah, when Scott Morrison and Donald Trump and other people started blaming China for it and saying they did it on purpose or implying as much.
And Chinese people were being attacked in the streets and Chinese people were being regarded with suspicion, and he wanted to show the goodwill of Chinese people. He made this donation. That is what he did. But under law, it effectively constituted what you called in your article you wrote this week in the Alert Service, a pre-crime. Please explain.
Which is it's a reference to, there's a pretty well-known novel or novella by Philip K. Dick called Minority Report. They made it into a movie with Tom Cruise. You have these what he called precognitive psychics who say, oh, that person's going to commit a crime.
Yeah.
So we're going to arrest them before they do it.
And then the SWAT team storms them. And
the helicopters, the whole bit. Well, this wasn't quite that extreme in terms of the performance, but it is in terms of what they've...
But it is a pre-crime.
He's done nothing wrong. They've decreed that because he's Chinese, because he referred to himself as Chinese, and said that, something that could be spun as saying, this is trying to influence the Australian government potentially one day, maybe, we don't know when, but he's currying favour with this Liberal who he thinks highly of, his fellow Liberal Party member, so that one day he'll be able to manipulate him to policy positions favourable to the Chinese government.
Which Duong didn't say that.
No.
They said that's what he was thinking.
They said that's what he was doing.
They said that's what he was thinking.
Yeah, because he referred to himself as Chinese.
Now, the only thing he ever asked Tudge for, apart from coming to this event, was he did ask him to help, as the immigration minister, to help work out a visa for someone who wanted to travel overseas.
Yeah, go back to Vietnam for some reason.
That happens 1 million times a day.
Every day.
From every ethnic community in Australia.
Everyone of
right.
Anyone from any background, all the time. If you know a politician, you ask them to look into something for you. You ask them to intercede if they can. That's what politicians are for. That's why you have local members.
Now, the reason we're talking about this now, this sentencing for Sonny Duong was in February. We're talking about it now because only this week did we read the judge's remarks explaining his sentencing. And it was actually quite detailed, which was very interesting to read. And when we read through it, it appeared to me, which is why I asked Richard to write an article about it, and this is what I'm going to ask about now. It appeared to me that in order to make this pre-crime look suspicious, the key part of the trial was they brought in some kind of expert to give evidence that what Sonny Duong was doing was part of this thing that they call the United Front Work System of the United Front Work Department. And so somebody was able to present that. That person isn't revealed. It was done somewhat secretly.
Yeah, the identity protected by the court as an intelligence operative, which presumably means an officer of ASIO, ASIS, or one of their international partner agencies, Five Eyes.
Yeah. So what are they getting at here with this United Front stuff?
Well, they claim that this is a global industrial scale espionage and foreign interference operation.
But it's nothing compared to the one I started off with. But
No,
keep
no.
going.
What it actually is, so back in between this Mr. Duong's alleged crime, that was in April of 2020. In June of 2020, ASPI, the infamous, what do they call it? American Strategic Propaganda Institute.
That's right.
The Australian Strategic Policy Institute that takes commissions from the American and other allied governments and arms companies to write war propaganda against China. Does it on commission.
Plus, remember, you're going to talk about what ASPI did in 2020. In 2018, it was ASPI that lobbied for this law, this foreign interference law that Sonny Duong was jailed under, the same ASPI. So this is an American dictated law on Australia. So then ASPI did this American dictated expose on the United Front.
Yeah, and so they got a guy who's a young kid, 22, 23 years old at the time, called Alex Josky, who grew up in Beijing. His mother's Chinese. His father was a Treasury official and intelligence analyst attached to the embassy there for those years. So that's supposed to give some credence to this thing, and he misrepresents the whole history of what United Front actually means in China, cherry picks quotes out of context or provides false context for these things that people said in the 30s. The United Front started out as, the real United Front, started out as the temporary alliance when the Chinese suspended their civil war to fight the Japanese invaders in what later became World War II.
Which by any measure in history should be revered as a good thing.
Yeah, and you know and we've published stuff about all the underhanded stuff that the nationalists, the Kuomintang, did that the Communist Party would have been perfectly justified in tearing it up. They didn't, because they knew they needed to sort their differences out later, and they did, and they won. So the United Front since then just refers to the way that there's a consultative process in China, a different version of democracy, where the 8 other official political parties, yes, you've heard that right, it's not a one-party state, it's just that the Communist Party is bigger than all the others put together, but there are 8 parties. They're the ruling party and have been for all these years.
But all the other parties have an input role into this.
They have input, as does the business chamber, the trade unions and various ethnic and religious groups. There's 50-some official different ethnicities in China who get favourable treatment for the most part. They don't get persecuted. And that's what the United Front is. And so the United Front Work Department is the subset of their equivalent of National Parliament that oversees that process, including via outreach to Chinese citizens abroad and to diaspora communities, what they call overseas Chinese. And that's all it is. It's just it's China's version of what every country does.
And some countries do more than others. So now, if for those who didn't figure it out, now we will reveal, by contrast, the scenario I started with, of that level of foreign interference, that is what's done by the State of Israel in Australia every day. That is how the State of Israel operates. And there are Australian organisations representing the Jewish diaspora, for want of a better word, who call themselves names like the Zionist Federation of Australia, who's, even though they're Australians, they exist solely to further the cause of the State of Israel within Australia. So if that's okay, and I'm not saying it's not okay, right? But when you understand that that's how the Israelis do it, when you understand, and the Americans are just, I mean, the Americans have sort of done it in a even more comprehensive way in a sense. And of course, the Brits are the masters of it all because we still pledge allegiance to their king, right? But when you understand that, the fact that what China was doing was entirely normal and very mild compared to it, and that what the people who want war with China turned around, they demonised it using these labels like the United Front.
Yeah, so the whole conviction and jailing of this guy is based on the misrepresentation, the lie, deliberate lie about what the United Front work department is, and the fact that he identified himself as Chinese and said, well, this will be good for us Chinese. Yeah. Because it was a goodwill gesture to show that Chinese Australians are not the enemy and you should stop persecuting us and blaming us for COVID. And that's all it is. That's the whole thing that this hangs on. And the judge, basically, he acknowledges that in his sentencing remarks. No criminal history, genuine charitable work. It's just that this is supposedly, one day you're going to use this influence, or you might do, or you could, to advance the interests of China.
So, and to cut it all back, the essence of this is one day Chinese Australians are going to use their influence to make us friendly to China, and the Americans say that's not allowed.
Basically.
That's what we're dealing with, right? There's nothing sovereign about us here. One of the aspects of it, Richard, is it really, like this whole United Front stuff, but everything else is based on how successfully they've demonised everything Chinese. And the one that really pulled me up was the reference to WeChat, because part of the proof of how nefarious this guy was is he communicated to Chinese government officials using the encrypted app WeChat, whereas all apps are encrypted.
Yeah,
right.
Any messaging app is encrypted. They're legally required to be, to a certain extent.
Plus, I don't know if people know this, but there's the world's richest billionaire is a guy named Elon Musk, and his obsession is turning what used to be called Twitter into something that can compete with WeChat, because WeChat is the best damn application on earth. Yeah. It is unbeatable. The Chinese have come up with, ask Elon Musk, he is jealous of what you can do with WeChat. So you know what the 1.5 million people in China use when they want to communicate? WeChat. Everyone does it. And now I do it. I talk to Chinese people and they say, you on WeChat? So I'm on WeChat. You know, it's really sophisticated, really good. Oh, you can do this, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
I use it for a fraction of what it's capable of doing. In China and those places, you do all your banking on it as well, right?
Yeah, banking, payments.
It is 100% normal, but because it's China and it's WeChat, and because you've got little punks, Wolverine punks, like Senator James Patterson, Victorian Liberal Senator in the Senate, jumping up and down about anything Chinese, even to the extent that Chinese-made video cameras and Chinese-made port cranes are spying on us.
Yeah.
Right?
How, we don't know. They're only connected to the internet if you put them on there.
And all that whole narrative contributed to this poor guy now being in jail. And then the other part that pulled me up was the judge actually, to his credit, gives a bio of Sunny Duong in there. And I'd seen none of this in the press at the time to actually humanise this guy, to get any public sympathy for him. But it turns out, you know, he had to leave Vietnam as a refugee.
Yeah, his family were in business and they were shut down and not directly targeted, he said, but put out of business. He was removed from his family and sent to be a labourer in the boondocks somewhere, and eventually got out of the country on a really harrowing boat journey to Thailand with people dying everywhere.
They got pirated by Thai pirates. I remember as a kid reading about these Vietnamese boat trips with the Thai pirates. He was defending himself when they wanted to steal his watch, and he held his arm up and he got slashed with a machete on his arm.
There's people dying of disease and starvation and getting thrown overboard for the sharks. The whole bit. Gets to Australia, sets up a business, goes to, works 6 days a week while he goes to night school to learn English, sets up his own business that gets destroyed by the Labor Party government policy at the time, the
dropping
recession
tariffs.
we had to
They
have, which
dropped
the judge
tariffs
got
and
wrong and said that they implemented tariffs. They
No,
removed them.
they
That's what
dropped tariffs and
destroyed textiles.
He was in textiles, put them all out of business.
And so he joins the Liberal Party in the early 1990s in response to that, and that's his political activity ever since. In the Liberal Party, the most anti-communist political party in the country, and he's supposed to be a commie agent because just that quick.
And the other thing which I didn't know, and it's really sad, he has a 7-year-old son.
Yeah, he married late and has a young boy with developmental problems.
Who is under care of the NDIS. And then we thought, well, maybe that's why he decided to donate to a children's hospital.
Yeah.
Right? So that poor boy is without a father for 12 months. He could have got a 10-year sentence. He got a 2.5-year sentence, but 12 months non-parole period, basically. That's what he's serving now.
And a good behaviour bond for 4 years, which means he's not allowed to talk to a politician for the next 4 years or they'll throw him back in jail.
And so when you look at the overall picture, that's why we say there's a Chinese diaspora in Australia of 1.5 million. That's why we say 1.5 million at risk, in the sense that anything they do can be demonised like this.
Yeah.
And they're all at risk of this law, but it's not just them. So Dan Duggan is in prison as an Australian doing business with China, and it's people like him that are going to be at risk for these kinds of laws as well. Also that evil people, and I can't exaggerate, evil people in America and Britain and their accomplices in Australia can get their war with China. That would be the end of the world anyway, which we should be doing everything we can to stop it.
Yeah. Policies favourable to the Chinese government include not starting World War III and killing every person and complex life form on the planet.
Oh, we can't have that then.
Can't have that.
You can't do anything favourable to the Chinese government. Look, we're out of time, but Australians should be absolutely outraged by this. You know, if you've probably heard it now here for the first time. You know, we knew a little bit about the case, but we hadn't seen the judge's explanation before. It is absolutely outrageous. So's the Dan Duggan thing. So's the David McBride thing. This country has descended into a fascist hellhole by the war party that's just got us following on the Brits and the Americans by the nose. You should be absolutely outraged by it. Absolutely outraged, and join us in the fight to make sure we stop this from happening. We need, as a country, to assert ourselves as a sovereign country with an independent foreign policy. And until we do that, no Australian will be safe. Everyone, white Australians, Chinese Australians, I don't care where you're from, everyone will be at some kind of a risk until we start asserting an independent foreign policy. All right, well, Richard, thank you very much, as usual. That was, I hope, quite enlightening for the viewers.
Thanks, Robbie. Thanks
to you, the viewer, for tuning in. Remember, go back to look at the links below if you can help David McBride, Dan Duggan. Please do. It's really crucial. And yeah, get in touch with any local post office protests. Let us know about them so we can get in touch with them, get our stuff to them, get them involved in the campaign that'll save all post offices and be the castle for the king, which is cash. See you next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.